Welcome, everybody, to another episode of the ShopNotes podcast, a weekly woodworking podcast where you learn behind-the-scenes information from the folks at Woodsmith. I'm your host, Phil Huber. Today, I'm joined by one of my usuals, Logan Whitmer, and special guest, Dillon Baker. Today's episode number 40, is vegan woodworking.
Wow.
Thanks for joining us.
This episode of the ShopNotes podcast is brought to you by Woodsmith Magazine. Woodsmith Magazine has been the trusted source for all your woodworking information for over 40 years. From tips and techniques to furniture projects to shop projects, you'll find it all at Woodsmith Magazine. Subscribe today at woodsmith.com.
All right. Now, in order to limit the amount of damage that we're going to get from vegans,
They don't believe in eating meat. They don't have weapons, right?
Right. Sure.
It'll be fine.
Yeah. Anyway, the origin story for today's topic, I'm almost sad to say, comes from Logan and his sawmilling experiences again.
There's nothing wrong with that.
And I only do this largely for Dillon's benefit so that he can be thinking of stuff here right now. The idea is, and it comes from, there's a lot of folk, and we've done it, is talk about like, what's your favorite wood species to work with? And it's a related question. If you only get to work with one wood species, what would it be? And I would like to twist that a little bit. Again, based on Logan's, sawmilling is, rather than narrow it down to one species, if I could, I would limit my woodworking to just softwoods. And I've done... go ahead.
I was saying this came from like a fir tree I was cutting, and I was sending you pictures of it. And you said, I could completely be a vegan woodworker. And I'm like, what's that? And you just said, somebody that only works with softwoods. Which, thinking about it, there's some awesome softwoods, right?
Oh, yeah.
What would stop you?
I think the only thing really that stops me, and I think it's I think it's partly psychological and partly supply oriented. Psychological being you can't find decent softwood, which I think is sort of true, sort of a myth. And then the other one is softwood and supply. So
supply.
That there's just not a wide variety of softwood commonly available that looks decent. Like you can find knotty pine till the cows come home.
Mm-hmm.
But to find, at least around here in the Midwest, finding, like decent white pine, firs, you sawed a cedar not that long ago, Logan.
Yep.
Redwood, because I did Dillon, you did that, those candle lanterns, and one of them was redwood.
Yeah. I mean, commercially, it's virtually extinct. And I know that the small amount that we had acquired, Logan supplied it, and that was something that clearly wasn't from around here. I mean, it was California, wasn't it, Logan?
Yeah. Well, it was came from a water tank on the top of like Las Vegas Menards or something like that. It was like an industrial water tank that was on top of a building out in the desert.
Right.
From who knows. But yeah, I mean, and just to be clear, we're talking about softwoods in the literal term.
Right.
Because I work with a lot of arborists, and they say, oh, no, it's softwood. It's soft maple. It's like, no, technically that's a hardwood. We're talking about softwoods, the pine trees, the stuff that doesn't lose its leaves, the non-didaceous trees. So.
And like Dillon, you can share a little of your experience because you're working on your Roubeau style workbench in a softwood that isn't really that soft.
Yeah. yeah, the like Phil said, the Roubeau style bench I have is actually made from old growth Doug fir, or so we think, that were structural beams in an old kind of turn of the century industrial building in downtown Des Moines. And it's, it's wonderful to mill and to work with for the most part, but it does have, you know it just like everything else, it has its pros and cons. I mean, it's cutting very well, and of course it milled very well in terms of joining and planing it. But when you go to do things like sanding or cross cutting it with hand saws, it is very splintery. But with that being said, when I went to surface the top as well as the bottom, it actually planed quite well, as long as you're, as usual, your blade sharp and the sole of your plane iron is well waxed. But it's kind of has the same kind of pitfalls as even some plywoods do, where you go to run your finger across it and you have an entire a splinter that's basically piercing through one side of your finger and the other. And I can bear testament to that. I just pulled a piece out of my middle finger on my left hand the other day that had been occupying space in my finger for the better part of a week. So
we call those javelins.
Yes.
It's all softwoods. I don't know why. Like, I guess pine's usually okay, but like the redwood splinters suck. The fir splinters suck. Cedar splinters suck.
Mm-hmm.
They're all bad.
And they always feel venomous too. Like there's the puncture wound pain of it, but then it feels like there is some kind of toxin in there that is.
You're working against the clock.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, yes. I think one of the things that is interesting to me about softwoods, and I mean, you can say this about hardwoods as well, but in between the different species, you have a complete range of different hardnesses, right? So, like, you get some southern yellow pine, that can be fairly hard, especially if it's old growth stuff. Whereas you get into like the white cedar I milled this weekend, it's like lifting a sheet of blue styrofoam. It's like so lightweight, it's so soft. It smells wonderful, unlike the blue styrofoam. But it's fascinating from a material
doesn't taste as good.
It doesn't taste as good now. We've talked about this before. How I'm just fascinated by the different materials. In the softwood species by themselves, you have 1,000 different, species and different properties of each. It's very interesting. I also like the fact that softwood some softwoods have the best weight to strength ratio of any wood. Fir being one of those. It's a very strong wood for its weight.
Yeah.
It's fascinating to me.
I guess, and that's why that's why I see it almost as like a dream category to work in, because of distinct it is and how much variation you have in it. Like I really like being from Wisconsin. I was exposed to some really nice white pine, growing up, that you could find, or, reclaimed stuff or whatever. And they're still around, and I know that, like when we had the fine woodworking guys here in the Northeast, they get a lot of really good white pine too, but it's not as easy to find in Iowa, oddly enough. But, like going back to what, Dillon's projects with those candle lanterns, I made 2 of them, one out of redwood and one out of cedar. And the cedar that I had was, from an old, not an old, it was just from a 4x4. But when I milled it up, it had very similar grain and coloring to some redwood, so you have janky looking cedar that I wouldn't even want to burn. And then, there's some really nice stuff. And then you start getting into like, I don't know, the exotics, so to speak, of, like white cedar or Alaska yellow cedar.
Mm-hmm.
Cypress, like I think you did one of the lanterns in Cypress, right?
Yeah. Yep. Yeah. And it again, I think the milling qualities that are probably comparable to, some of the firs. Still a little splintery. And the other thing too, especially working with that stuff on a smaller scale, that particular project was so pattern driven. And so you really have to be careful with, using router bits on ingrain and that sort of thing. Cause you're not just botching a small area. You're probably taking a full strip out of a workpiece there. So, but that's all part of the learning curve, but nevertheless, I mean, it's just stuff you kind of learn along the way, but it is really, really nice to work with. And I think, it's one of those things that we, in our, line of business, we're able to explore, but, probably haven't as much as we'd like to, or should have. And, we're just kind of always stuck in this kind of default of, this kind of spectrum that we have of domestic hardwoods that we use. And, a lot of that is driven by just accessibility to our readers too. It's not just, because we're lazy. It's just, again, these are things that are, commercially available, across the United States for the most part. So it's nice when we can kind of get into these other, even domestic woods, whether they be hard or soft, and kind of start introducing those even maybe in smaller capacity to some of our projects. So.
Well, we did have a reader too that he built the weather vane right after that issue hit. I mean, it was like issue was in mailboxes, and we got a photo the next week of his weather vane, and he built it out of redwood. And this was about the same time you were making those lanterns. And I said, that turned out great. Where did you get that from? And he's like, Lowe's carries it. I'm like, what? He's like, oh yeah, my Lowe's carries redwood. And I was like, no way. And lo and behold, the next week an envelope shows up where he had sent me the tag from the end of the board. So I had the SKU number, which I'm like, that is freaking awesome. So, even though we do build stuff out of, kind of our big 3 or 4, the walnut, oak, maple, and cherry. Yeah. Those are the big 4 because they are commercially available. Regionally, there's different stuff available too. We can buy cypress up here, but it's not like you're going to drive down the road to, the sawmill down the road and pick up a bunch of cypress boards. You can't do that here.
Right.
Now, if you're in the South, all day, you can do that all day long in the South. So it's fascinating. And I also, when it comes to softwood, I appreciate the fact that they're fast growing. So you can, granted, a lot of this is plantation stuff now, right? So a lot of the fir, a lot of the pine is plantation. It's not old growth stuff anymore. But that makes it eco-friendly to grow and harvest. Now the quality isn't the greatest, because then you really have that really pronounced late and early wood. So those growth strings that cause the hard areas and stuff, they're spaced out. They're very pronounced. But again, it's fascinating material. As a whole, softwood is fascinating, and it is a joy to work with when you're in a rut where you've been working with walnut and cherry and oak. And I say that we're privileged; we get to do that all day, every day. So I'm sure some readers are thinking, "Oh, shove it," because I don't get to work.
they don't have a company card.
Yeah, I was trying to come up with a good way to say that, and Nate didn't have to beep out. But so we are a little privileged that we get to work with that stuff every single day. But when we do get a chance to work with something a little different, like that redwood, or some nice cedar, or it's nice, and it makes me appreciate of working with it. Now I will say there are some things that I would much rather have a hardwood for, right? Like, in my opinion, turning. I hate turning softwoods. Hate it. They're splintery. They're chippy. I've never turned them green. I can just imagine the sap hitting me. I don't want to even think about that. But that's where I'm always going to take a hardwood. But you're right, Phil. I don't think there's any reason that there may be a project or an instance where a hardwood is the more logical choice due to a durability factor, like a tabletop.
Yeah.
I don't think a white cedar tabletop that is basically white styrofoam is going to last when you put spoons and forks. But there's no reason you can't build most of our stuff out of softwood.
Yeah. I mean, you run into the same design issues. I think. I mean, Dillon, and by I say design issues, the appearance of the material.
Sure.
You know, that if you're going to find, flat sawn Douglas fir does not nearly approach the cool factor of vertical grain.
Right.
Fir.
Right. Absolutely.
So you really have to be more selective on finding those boards cut the way you want.
Right.
Because I think like flat sawn white pine can look good, but if you have wide, essentially quarter sawn white pine where you have long straight lines, to me is much more attractive.
Yeah, definitely, than having cathedraling or so. I guess that's kind of the gambit is you may end up finding yourself going through more material when constructing a project, especially again if you're doing something like Logan suggested of doing a tabletop or any really piece of fine furniture where the graining is going to could make or break the piece visually. And also I guess the other thing too with like especially we keep kind of going back or defaulting to Doug fir, you're probably, I mean, not that you couldn't, but you're probably not going to stay in it. So again, the appearance is a lot more paramount, I think, again, in the selection process, again, depending on the piece. So, Logan, you were talking about kind of the green growing trees, and I don't know, I'll have to forgive my ignorance, but does red grandis and or eucalyptus fall into softwood category? Those technically hardwoods.
I think they're technically hardwoods.
Hardwoods,
Okay.
yeah.
Okay.
I mean, even though they're, I guess, do trees in Florida shed their leaves? I would think so, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, I would expect that eucalyptus would be
A hardwood. Even though it's softer. Yeah.
I mean, same way with like basswood. Basswood around here is a hardwood tree.
Sure.
Soft maple's a hardwood tree. It loses its leaves every year. So yeah, it's interesting because that is, in my opinion, something Dillon just said that made me think about it. The one downfall aside from the durability and the dent factor of softwood is softwood generally does not finish as well as hardwood, right? Like in my experience, it's very hard to get an even stain on softwood unless you are using like a preconditioner or something. You have to do more work. It's harder to finish, I guess. It's more labor intensive than finishing like an oak or a cherry or a walnut, where you can just slap an oil varnish on it and call it good, or oil finish. A little more labor intensive.
Yeah. I guess I also look at it, you can look at it as a woodworker, I enjoy the whole process of woodworking. And to me, working with softwoods as a family is very evocative in the sense that, you find a nice cedar board and you feel like a superhero hand planing it, because your blade is moderately sharp and you are pulling off full width shavings and the surface practically is lit from within. Essentially all the softwoods, when you cut into them, have a smell that you would have as a scented candle all day long.
Right. It kind of provides that same sense of false security that alcohol provides without having to drink alcohol.
And there's the show title.
There we go. I mean,
it's funny because you're right. I mean, like so in the last week I've cut white cedar and I cut white pine the other day. They smell phenomenal.
Oh yeah.
Like every softwood I have cut, I have milled smells great. Compared to like walnut or ash. And I mean, oak smells great, but that's funny. It's funny you say it because it's true.
Yeah.
Make sure you're documenting this for new initiatives. We're going to start making scented candles and build an empire to go up against Yankee candles.
Northern white cedar and southern yellow pine.
Well, I mean, like, we were just in the shop, and Dillon's working on his bench, and he's trying to plow through some pretty hefty mortises for the legs. And even routing Douglas fir, you walk into the shop, and that smell is right there, and it's just an amazing smell. So that's half of the joy, I think, of working it is that it's total sensory. That when your tools are sharp, like even running it through a planer, having that really smooth surface come out of it.
Yeah.
I think if there's a downside is that I feel that the softwoods have become so associated with construction and or pedestrian uses that it has a low class
proletariat
association to it.
Sure.
You can call them Pinterest projects. Saying.
Well, I mean, because we've all seen poorly done knotty pine projects.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, it's definitely become stigmatized by, I think, association.
Yeah.
And I think it's probably our job to save it from itself, and or the reputation that was bestowed upon it. So, but yeah, you're not you're absolutely right. I think it's one of those things in terms of woodworking that it engages, it engages all the senses, which can be an overload for people and maybe something you don't get on a regular basis. So it's and you don't necessarily have to be a woodworking to feel that. I mean, you don't have to be a woodworker to walk into a wood shop to know that something smells good or doesn't smell good, or anywhere for that matter. So
yeah.
It's interesting from a milling standpoint. Softwoods present an entirely new set of challenges that hardwoods don't. Don't present on the sawmill, because the blades can be much more aggressive and they cut better. My not as aggressive hardwood blades don't cut soft woods with the crap. I mean, it tears them more than it cuts them.
Really?
And it's. I mean, I can run one of my blades of ash or oak or walnut, cherry, and you get a pretty smooth surface. I mean, you can see lines. But when you run it through cedar, northern white cedar, or white pine, or any of those the surface is super fuzzy. Just because it's like it's tearing at the fibers instead of cutting them. And the amount of sap that's in them is insane. I mean, it sticks to everything. My mill actually came with some oiler pads that are meant to go in front of the wheels on the track. You're supposed to saturate them with oil, let it oil the track as you're milling. Right. Mm-hmm. And I asked the guys at Motor, I was like, hey, what are these for? These are dumb. I've never filled them full of oil. And they're like, well, when you start cutting softwoods, then you'll realize. And it's like, yeah, whatever. And then I cut my first pine log, and I was like, oh my god, everything is so sticky. I mean, and actually I cut some pine the other day for a YouTube video that I'll have up hopefully next week. And I sat down and I'm like, holy cow, I'm like, just the sawdust is all tacky. Everything is tacky. Just everything. Which is crazy. And when you dry and most commercially available lumber, I believe, has been kiln dried. And one of the points of kiln drying, obviously, to get moisture down, secondarily to kill bugs. Third is to set the pitch. So any of that sap that's in the tree, once it hits a certain temperature, I think it's 160 degrees, any of that sap that's in the wood will harden and won't flow out. So if you do get a piece of air-dried pine or cedar or something, you cut into it and you hit a pitch pocket, if it's been air-dried, that pitch will still flow out. It might be slowly, but it will still flow. Where been kiln dried, it hardens it up and kind of crystallizes it. So just an interesting difference when it comes to actually producing the lumber out of logs too.
Yeah. Well, I think that, another thing that this whole topic touches on in a way is, something that we've been trying to do on the TV show. And I know in the videos that you do, Dillon, is, we present something in the magazine, a project in a given species, because we have to build it out of something.
Right.
But
right.
that doesn't preclude from trying it in something else, and I think that would be, I view that as kind of one of our challenges is, hey, we're building it out of this, for a video or for our personal project or whatever. I'm
Right.
deciding to build it out of that. And there's absolutely nothing wrong with that.
Yeah, I know. I think part of it for us is, I don't know, I feel like I catch myself kind of reiterating in some of those videos, just because we did it this way, obviously doesn't mean you have to do it this way. We would love to see, your interpretation of these projects. I mean, again, they're just really just jumping off points, but I think that I think for some people, it's probably a little psychological. It's, they want to follow it to a T. Obviously, we're not, implying that you should or have to do that. But again, we have to have a starting point. But again, I think we're almost, just as excited. We're not just excited to build these projects and share them with people. I think we're almost more excited to see what people do with our plans, whether it be build the project or, have comments that are based around, what they thought of the article or, but yeah, I mean, that's an interesting point too, because the way that I approach projects, I mean, I hardly think about the material I'm going to use, at least from a wood standpoint right off the bat. I mean, it's usually totally driven by an idea. Sometimes it's driven by a material. Typically, that's more of like a fabric or a piece of hardware or even an application of some sort. And it's just as important. But again, I can tell you as someone who designs for the magazine that a lot of times I don't really think about that until the project's built. And I think that's just part of building. It's part of designing. You can't know everything all up front. I'm always been somebody who is very visual and short of just building something or having to see it in the round, it's very difficult for me to make those sorts of decisions. So those sometimes are, secondary or tertiary in the process. So.
Cool. Anyway, that's where, like I said, it was just something, having it. I've thought about it in the past as a topic. And just an interest in being, building projects out of stuff, and then being able to live vicariously through Logan's sawmilling,
Definitely.
where he's talking about like that huge fir tree that you did. My mouth is watering over waiting for that wood to dry,
Completely blanket statement. Nobody has to live vicariously through me. Come out and throw lumber and half of it's yours. Blanket statement.
Yeah. Well, a couple of summers ago, I got some, I think it was red pine from Chris that I carved a bowl from for a Christmas present. And it was that was relatively green. I mean, it wasn't straight from the tree, but it was just a delight to work with. There's every species has its own idiosyncrasies that you have to learn and adapt to get the result that you're looking for. But it was just a pleasure to do.
Yeah. See, I always thought that when we throw out the term vegan woodworking, somebody's going to assume we mean going out and finding a tree, pruning a limb, bandaging it up and using the limb, but allowing the tree to grow.
Propagate.
Yes.
There you go.
Yes. You only take what you need.
Right. Okay. So what projects you guys got working on?
You want to go first, Logan? I can go first. Yeah.
Yeah.
So where do I begin? Right now, sorry, I'm going to turn to my left here because I got my matrix right next to me. We are entering the 253rd issue of Woodsmith. I have just finished up doing, we're working on a modern federal piece. We've kind of talked about in our Facebook Live a little bit, or alluded to it. It is a Campeche chair, which is kind of based off this kind of the style and the joinery of them are actually based off those old kind of Greek, I think it's Curule, Curule. I think it's Curule chair, perhaps. I may be mispronouncing it. It's Curule, but they're kind of like those X-frame stools, and kind of throughout history, I'm sure you've seen them in any capacity as they've evolved over centuries. But we're working on one that's a little bit more of a modern interpretation of one. I've been kind of following this, or doing some research on this 20th century designer named Clara Porset. She was a Cuban-born furniture designer. So we've got that piece that's Mark actually is pretty much done with. We're having the canvas sewn at the moment. And then there's some coffee accessories that we've, again, talked about a little bit in our Facebook Live. Just a series of 3. We've got a coffee mug, a measuring spoon that seconds as a coffee ground bag clip, and then a little coffee filter caddy that goes along with that. So those are well in the works. I've started modeling a Thomas Day lounge or settle for 254, which will be kind of cool. It'll be in our heirloom category of project for that round. That'll be a kind of a cool piece. Again, traditional, but also very funky for the time. So it's there's definitely traditional components to it, but it has a little bit more, I think, of a personality and, kind of accentuated forms on it. And then I am going to, need to be jumping into a project for Pop Wood. I'm going to be doing some turned canisters for them for the next article I'll be doing for, I would assume, goes into the issue for next year sometime in the beginning of the year. So other than that, just trying to chip away at the workbench. But again, that's more of a personal project, so I kind of work on that as I can. But yeah.
Now, I had a question for you about the workbench.
Sure.
Only because I know that you were starting in on the dovetailed leg mortises.
Mm-hmm.
Is there, how do you encounter any feelings of intimidation when you're doing something like that, and how do you get over it? Because it's like, I know that you did the through mortises, square, not that difficult to do, but when you start to get to those dovetail shaped ones, like, to me, that would be something I'm hesitating to make the first cut on until you actually do it.
I was actually more terrified to do the through mortises, the squared ones. I mean, you're working with a 5-inch thick top. What could go wrong? I just, especially with dull chisels, I'm definitely known to not, 1, abuse my chisels, and 2, hardly ever sharpen them, which I definitely don't recommend. It's just, I like to work efficiently, which seems counterproductive considering the fact that a sharp chisel is going to go a lot farther than a dull one. But no, back to your point, I think the dovetails for me, why I don't fear them as much, is that, there's the hand element. I am hand cutting the shoulders on those at a 45-degree angle. But you're able to access the bottom of that joint with either whether you're using a handheld router. I'm probably going to end up cleaning it up with a router plane and then doing a little bit of chisel work. But with the through mortises for the traditional through tenon, I went at that from either side with a chisel just to get 4 square sides at least an inch down, and then I actually went at it with a router to clean up a lot of it. Had to flip it. But then there's a matter of kind of going back and cleaning up those corners in there where the 2 sides meet. And, that's kind of nerve wracking because, you're entering from either side. And if your measurement's off, just enough and they don't meet, that's kind of when the, expletive comes out, and, you're finding yourself, trying to get creative, which a large part of, woodworking is kind of getting that point where you mess something up and you have to improvise. But yeah, it's super nerve wracking. I've never done mortises that thick in my life. And I'm almost forced to work with tools that I don't feel like I have a proficiency with, because I like to streamline things. I love using jigs. I love using pattern bits. I love having a fence, and a power tool. So this has definitely been an exercise in some hand tool work, which I've actually really enjoyed. And, I've been using some of those Japanese hand saws, and I think a lot of it is just you have to be patient. You really just have to go slow. There's no rushing through it. You're going to be a lot happier with those results if you just take your time on them. So, I mean, that's really the only sound advice I have to give people as I kind of go through this process. So,
yeah. Logan, what do you got?
So I was out taking the morning off to cut some timber. Unfortunately, the logs were not all ready when I got there, so tomorrow will be the day to saw. I did find a large railroad spike in the side of the one tree I got. Didn't find it with a blade. Thankfully, I saw it before I sawed it. Did it? Nose roll on his eyes. So I did. I went home and I decided I had one huge ash log that has been sitting at my place for probably a year now, and it's just too big to go on my mill. It's like 44 inches, so I ended up cutting a bunch of 20 by 20 by 10-inch thick bowl blanks, so just some massive, huge bowl blanks. So right now I have a bowl on the lathe in the shop that I'm going to go finish roughing out since we're done with this. And I am finishing up on my second vise stand, my bench vise stand. This one will be for my buffer wire wheel comp. But I need to get it back on, and then that's ready for paint. So, yeah.
All right, cool. I'm still working on my Christmas presents. The one that shall remain a secret for now, but then trying to do some personal projects all at the same time. I want to do a little bit more shop organization. I have a couple of drawers in my tool cabinet that sort of resemble black holes that tools go into and don't come out of.
Yeah.
Or it's basically just a container for a pile, and I need to organize that a little bit. So trying to do that as well.
Pretty sure that's Webster's definition of a drawer, or a pile. That's what all my drawers, my shop turned into.
Yeah. I mean, and to a certain extent, if the drawer is shallow enough, that's not a big deal. Like all my layout tools are in the upper part of my tool cabinet. And even though the drawer is 30 some inches wide, I think it's right around 30 inches wide, 12 inches deep, the drawer's only 2 inches deep altogether, so you're not really going to lose stuff in there. You open it up, it looks like a disaster, but you can easily see pretty much everything in the drawer.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So how far out are you on your mysterious Christmas project? I haven't tested this because I'm going to make one. So
I'm probably 75% of the way done on it. I had to take a little bit of a break because we're running out of good weather in Iowa here. So I had to do an outdoor project. I was tasked with deck washing, scraping, and staining our deck.
Oh, wow.
And then also doing the same thing to a fence. So we have a cedar fence that I don't know that's ever been stained at all. And so I did the bleach-based chemical wash on it to try and clear away the oxidation. And the deck, I will admit, I've let go for too long and took a lot more hand work than it needed to, but it looks awesome now, and the fence looks great. But now I can kind of turn my attention back to that.
Well, thankfully you have a young child that is an indentured servant,
right?
As long as he lives at home. So
yes,
you at least had a little extra horsepower.
Yes, I did, and he performed admirably in helping, even though it wasn't his funnest thing to do. So
good thing you have to pay him.
Right. Yeah.
I know.
Anyway, there you go. So that's what I'm doing, starting to turn back to my Christmas projects. And I think that wraps it up for another episode of the ShopNotes podcast. You can send us an email It's Woodsmith at woodsmith.com. You can also check out the show notes page at woodsmith.com/podcasts. Also, wherever you get your podcasts from your local podcastery, please feel free to give us a good review and a 5-star rating if it's appropriate. So we'll see you again next time for the Shop Notes Podcast.
This episode of Shop Notes Podcast is brought to you by Woodsmith Plans. You'll find nearly 1,000 plans covering everything that you'd want to build. Furniture projects to gift projects, kitchen accessories, workshop projects, and jigs and more. Find your next project at woodsmithplans.com.